Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Week That Was Detroit. My name is Saeed Khan, joined with an august group of panelists today. First and foremost, back in real time with us, so mercifully I don't have to remember his tagline anymore. Our maestro from Deadline Detroit, Alan Langle.
Hello. Good to be back.
A new tagline. We also have from Deadline Detroit, Nancy Derringer.
Not in my car this week.
So. Not in the car, someplace stable with, I think, hopefully stable internet. We were having some issues last week, but Nancy soldiered through, as did our audience. Joining us for quite a legal analysis, which we're going to need today, attorney Steve Fishman.
Okay, I think he's...
Good morning, all.
And senior managing partner at D. Erickson and Associates Public Relations, we have David Rudolph. Hello, David.
Hey, good morning. Go green. We're not beating up anybody this week.
There'll be more on that in a second. Well, but let's go ahead and start with where there really is some bullying going on, and that, of course, is in Ukraine. We find that this time the U.S. intelligence seemed to be right on point. It was leading up to the threat of Vladimir Putin invading, at least in part, his neighbor to the south, Ukraine. But as it now shows, it seems to be a much more comprehensive attack. Russian troops are within 9 kilometers of Kyiv. And by the way, for those who are providing support for Ukraine and its sovereignty, it's Kyiv. If you're old school Russian or Soviet, it is Kiev. But the fact that it is still within 5.4 miles, for those of you not listening from Windsor, shows how close to the city center Russian troops have infiltrated. What's going on? What can be done about this?
If I had the answer to that, Saeed, I'd be Secretary of State. So if anyone else would like to go over, take this one first, that'd be fine.
What does it say about the American response? Yeah, Alan.
I was going to say, first of all, chicken Kiev is what I grew up on. But you know what? I mean, right now, it's the best Biden can do is lay down the law and say, okay, any encroachment on any NATO countries. I think he's doing it. He can't send troops in. I mean, we're all sort of so frustrated watching. It's like we want to go in and say, let's go help them kick some ass. They're getting their asses kicked there. I think you can't. It's like when in 2003 when the U.S. went into Iraq, we just went smoothly into to Baghdad with very little resistance. But the resistance came later, and I think that's what's going to happen. They can't. The Ukrainians can't take on the Russians, toe to toe there, but they can do an insurgency, and I think that's what's going to happen. But it's extremely frustrating. And the other thing I was going to say is that a lot of Republicans are saying, oh, if Trump was in there, they would have never done it. Trump's crazy. He's so unpredictable. They were afraid of him. Then they see Joe Biden. But yesterday I was reading in Yahoo where somebody said the other side of that is that Trump was doing the bidding for Putin and saying, let's get rid of NATO, which is exactly what Putin wanted. So why would Putin piss off Trump? So he and Trump, if he had gotten reelected, would have probably pulled out of NATO. And so, Michael, I always say, Trump's like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas.
What? Where's my fucking drink? I asked you for a drink.
You wanted a drink.
I just asked you for a fucking drink.
No, I thought you said that you were all right, Spider.
No. What do you got me on a fucking pay no mind list, kid?
Now go get your shine box.
Right, you mother.
So was that a restaurant or was that the Situation Room in the White House?
No, I think.
Okay, go ahead, Nancy.
I think Alan's right. I mean, I think that when the counterinsurgency starts in Kiev and the Russians learn what an IED is, and the Americans and the other NATO forces start surreptitiously shipping war materials across the border. I mean, this is going to be a very ugly situation. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But I think that, don't we have any hackers I mean, can't we do cyber attacks? I mean, it seems like all the best hackers all seem to be Russian or live in Russia or pay tribute to Russia, but it seems like we ought to be able to do this stuff too.
We do. I think the Russians are just so aggressive about it. I think we need, I think we have the capabilities to fight back on that front.
Well, there's a lot of ways to wage war now that don't involve.
I mean, the Pentagon has a whole unit over
Right.
there.
Exactly.
I mean, we do have people.
Yeah.
I think with respect to what's going to happen after this initial foray into the country, number one, maybe they forgot what happened when they went into Afghanistan. I can't remember how long they stayed, but they had enough when they left. They were smarter than we were. They left a lot quicker than we did. But I've read 2 or 3 articles from Russia experts. One was in the Times, one was in the Post. I can't remember the guys' names, but they kind of thought that Putin is a little bit crazy these days, that he's kind of losing it a little bit. And in all honesty, I kind of think that's true when you look at the size of the country. I mean, I know the eastern half, supposedly those are people who are sympathetic to the Russians, but it's a large country they're trying to occupy. And if we support them in terms of a counterinsurgency, they're not the same as the Afghans, but these are some tough folk too. And, you got people marching in Moscow against this war, and you've got young people in Russia that are opposed to this stuff. And when their economy goes even further into the shitter than it already is, I mean, I think that this guy is really kind of bitten off a little bit more than he can chew. But, I guess it'll remain to be seen.
Well, I remember millions of people protesting in London and in the United States against the second Iraq war, but that didn't exactly stop us going in. And a lot of people link the folly of Bush in invading a country that hadn't done anything to us to the encroachment on a sovereign state in the case of the Ukraine. David, I mean, how do you see the PR with this? I mean, is the optics for the American position seem to be wrought with a bit of contradiction?
Yeah, it is. And first, let me touch upon the first part of the question, which is I honestly believe what we can do is I think we're not doing enough. I like to see us all hands and feet in on the sanction aspect of it. I think we need to snatch up every bit of resources, bank money, not only just, to touch more to Putin, because quite frankly, he's really empowered a lot of his, his cronies, the oligarchs, that's where his money is buried. And I think we need to track every bit of it down from every family member, property here and the like. And he needs to really feel this in a much bigger way. I think there's more room. And I think, in fact, on both sides of the aisle, you've actually been hearing that in fact that we need to go now to the next level sooner than later. There's elements of this morning they were talking about SWIFT, the International Monetary Fund, where we can really impact them there, and I think that's in fact what we need to do. With this is a real test for the idea, the concept of NATO. And the fact that, we've not had this sort of test, since its creation, since World War II. And so, Putin has put the United States in a this is a tough situation because obviously they are a nuclear power. We can't just go and do what America likes to do sometimes and just put boots on the ground because we don't have any taste for that. But they're clearly, even from a the messaging part that Putin, of course, masterfully, he comes from the school of deception and, and just his claims as to why he's even, doing this because of neo-Nazi, influence in the area is just full of BS anyway. I mean, the reality is that he's more afraid of the Ukraine becoming part of, or its interest in becoming a NATO country, which wasn't going to happen anyway. But the idea of this, and I just heard earlier this morning that this idea of now that, hedging the neutrality part of that even the Ukraine president is suggesting is bringing Russia to the table to talk about that. But, again, I believe that this idea, as you're sort of looking at people in Russia are protesting, in support of this, Russia's like China, they can control every bit of media, the information that's out there, and they use that to their advantage when we are talking about a communist country.
So let's roll this back a little bit to the end of the Cold War. There were concentric circles for the old Soviet Union. There was the Warsaw Pact, which had, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany. I'm probably missing a couple of countries. Every single one of those countries is now a member of NATO. So for the former Soviet Union, i.e. Russia, and here you got an old dog like Putin, who wants to either consider himself to be Stalin or Peter the Great, or maybe even Catherine the Great, who knows? But the idea that the West certainly got into his neighborhood. But then three former Soviet republics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Baltic states, joined NATO. And here we see that since at least 2008, there's been an effort for two more former Soviet republics, Georgia in 2008, Ukraine certainly, at least a few times, being flirted with the idea of NATO. Is this Putin just saying NIMBY on steroids, not in my backyard, not in my front yard? And that did the West simply push too far in into Russian zones of influence?
Well, I think part of it is
The second
we have missiles everywhere surrounding there, too close for comfort for Russia.
Yeah.
And so they want to push back, and now they're gonna be on the Poland border with Ukraine and stuff like that. I think that's been the whole thing with Putin. Is so, I mean, I understand his point, but he's a total asshole, and the way he's going about it. I mean, if he wants to negotiate more, but it's, look, the people's will. We'll see what happens in Ukraine, how strong the will is of the people to push back on that. But
do you know the most interesting and entertaining theory that I've read this week about why Putin is acting this way? And I bring this up because we have another fellow, shall we say, golden age exercise freak here on the panel, and Mr. Fishman, that he's taking steroids. You know how he always likes to pose with his shirt off,
On a horse.
Yeah, on a horse and stuff. He's essentially, this is like a very lethal and expensive version of Putin's roid rage. But I don't know. I mean, when you start making excuses for NATO, which is, I mean, NATO states are not aggressive expansionists. I mean, they just essentially want to be left alone, and they want the help of their fellow treaty members to keep them that way. But I don't think you can blame, when you start blaming this on NATO, then you begin to sound like Tucker Carlson. And, I think I mentioned last
that'd
week.
That'd be a Shonda.
Yeah, and that would be a Shonda. I'm on a little road trip this week just to treat my cabin fever. And I've been listening. I want to get out of my bubble. So, I had a Chick-fil-A sandwich, and I'm also listening to a lot of, because I'm driving, I'm listening to a lot of AM radio. And to listen to these right-wing talk radio hosts twist themselves into pretzels, either trying to blame Biden, to say this never would have happened under Trump, to say that maybe this is justified because, after all, Vladimir Putin is a Christian, and he has a right to push back against, somebody who's getting into his personal space a little close, has really been something. Yesterday, I finally had to switch back to NPR after I heard Seb Gorka on some, third-tier lunatic show saying that the best thing about Donald Trump is that he's crazy, and being crazy is really an asset in the in international relations, because nobody knows what you're going to do. So anyway,
well, apparently he thinks that that Putin is a genius.
Yes,
the bromance is. Let's put it this way: I think it's no coincidence that Valentine's Day just passed when Trump said this.
Well, it really. Can you imagine? I mean, we've said many times. It's on a user key practically on my keyboard. How much damage this guy has done to the American, the American way of politics, the American people, and the nation as a whole. But can you imagine any other American president making a statement like that about somebody who is attacking an ally of ours? It's so beyond appalling. It's disgusting. But
it is downright disgusting. I'll say that I hope that we have Republicans step into this a little bit more with some courage, like I've heard Ben Sass, senator from Nebraska, talk about. He came very close to saying what Trump was saying was crazy, but this has to be brought back home to the middle part of America. As to I think Republicans need to be talking to their folks in these red states as to why this matters, and I don't think we're hearing enough of that. While we are yes concerned about what is happening there, but we need to bring this in and talk a little bit more about why this matters and what this is going to look like for people in these places, because I think they're not catching it, they're not understanding. And yes, what's happening in Ukraine does matter, and it should matter in red states.
Well, what of this idea? I mean, Nancy, you mentioned steroids. What about it being a manifestation of toxic masculinity? And that's what draws. And that's what draws not just a few Americans into having some Vladdy love.
As somebody who loves men and loves men for being men, I'm just going to take a pass on that one. If anybody else would like to handle it, so one of you other soy boys would like to handle that, I'll leave that up to you.
By the way, Nancy, if you were having cabin fever and you escaped to stay in a cabin, that would have been awesome. I would have loved the irony there.
Yeah.
But what is driving then, do you think? Is it this idea that Putin represents the restoration of Christianity, the restoration of strength, that he's showing a certain kind of testosterone? I mean, what seems to be then drawing people like Tucker Carlson and others into the fray?
I think he's an authoritarian, and they seem to love authoritarians. Tucker Carlson was in bed with what's his face in Hungary over the summer. He
Orban.
brought Viktor Orban. He brought his crew over there and did a very knee padsy kind of interview with him. And so they like this. They like authoritarians. That's why they like Trump so much. Maybe somebody like Tucker Carlson, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and has never really had any sort of, nobody's ever taken it out of his mouth. Maybe he's one of these guys who figures that he'll always be on the inside. And, he couldn't be on the inside with somebody like Barack Obama, but he could with Trump. I really don't know. I mean, that's between him and his therapist.
Well, speaking of then, and we've got just the most awesome suggestion for a segue here. Speaking of masculinity, let's go to the University of Michigan with news coming from the basketball court. You knew it was going to happen. That, by the way, Alan, is awesome. Not to give away who was the source of that segue.
Well, let's go to Steve Fishman, our U of M expert.
Yes, for those who are unaware of it, and this thing made international news. Head coach for the U of M basketball team, Juwan Howard, was playing, or his team was playing the Wisconsin Badgers. The game was pretty much a runaway, with the Badgers up by about 15 points with 15 seconds left. Wisconsin called a timeout. This seemed to bother Mr. Howard, and as they were going through the handshake line, he seemed to be less than enthusiastic about showing his sportsmanship and shaking hands with the Wisconsin head coach, named guard, because apparently forward and center were already taken as surnames, and refused to do so. There were words that were exchanged, and then there was a melee that broke out. And Juwan Howard is shown on several videotapes to have slapped not the head coach, but the mini guard, the assistant coach for the Wisconsin Badgers, which of course was just now yet another chapter in the never-ending saga of woes and travails facing the Ann Arbor campus. Going to you, Steve Fishman, and we're not saying this is the only reason that you were invited on the show, but we're certainly going to talk about this.
Well, there's a short version and a long version. The first thing, obviously, and Juwan's the first one to recognize this, what went on is unacceptable, and he knows it, and he knows he screwed up. And I'm glad that David is on, because for the life of me, I don't understand why whoever their PR people or their sports information people or whatever they call them, I don't know why they allowed him to go on that post-game interview. It doesn't seem to me, I don't know anything about PR, But I know enough to know you don't let someone who's been in a situation like that, who's lost his temper and who's embarrassed himself in the university, go out there and face not just one interviewer, but the usual gang of idiots that question the coaches at the press conferences afterward. And I think that in a sense, particularly from reading what all the non-players and the non-coaches have to say, I think it was his press conference, or his words at the press conference actually made it a whole hell of a lot worse than it should have been. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I'm not getting into what went on that caused all that. Okay. And I'm not going to get into things that are obvious to those of us who have played, those of us who know, for instance, that actually both coaches, in a sense, were wrong. Pressing when you're down 20, when the scrubs are in, that's not something that we ever did when we were at the University of Michigan. And the other side of it is calling a timeout when you're up 15 with 15 seconds to go. I heard Guard's rationale for it. He wasn't telling the truth. What he really should have said, which was the truth, was he didn't want to see the scrubs embarrassed, and they were getting embarrassed, obviously. They couldn't get the ball up the half court. They were being pressed. They kicked it away. They turned it over. None of that stuff ever should have happened, okay? So ultimately, I'm positive that the way Juwan Howard is looking at the world after he did what he did, he knows damn well it was wrong. It's completely inconsistent with the kind of person he is, because I know him, and all of us from the basketball program know him. What he feels the worst about, I'm pretty sure, is the effect on the kids, on his players. You have to remember, a coach like Juwan, all these coaches, when they recruit players, and Juwan has said this to all of us when we have reunions, he's recruiting families. He's going in and sitting in people's living rooms, and he's talking to them and telling them how their sons will do at the University of Michigan. It's more than just basketball, blah, blah, blah. I'm positive that what he feels the worst about is letting those people down. And I would bet money that he has called every single one of those families, every one of those parents, and apologized for what he did, and talk to them and get their reactions and make sure they understand that A, he knows he was dead wrong, and B, he's not going to do it again. Nothing like that's ever going to happen again. So that's kind of a long summary of it, but the handshake line, I've had conversations with a lot of the old guys. When we played, there was no such thing. When you got done, whether it was at Mumford in high school or at Michigan in college, if you wanted to go speak to somebody on the other team, you did. But the forced handshake line, I'm not a big fan of that, and neither are the guys that are in my age group, because the guy'd elbow you in the head, during the game, and you really didn't want to shake hands with the guy in the locker room. Okay. On the other hand, I saw what Coach Izzo said, and he's been coaching a long time. He's in the Hall of Fame. He thinks it's a great idea. He thinks it's wonderful. Everybody should go through a handshake line. So,
Steve, that's interesting that you say that, is because all this week, and I've been listening on talk radio, one thing I heard is the idea that maybe the handshake line should be just done with, and that just treated just like the way the pros do. Like when the game is over, you walk off. And in fact, there's pros and cons of that. The pros say that, hey, that this is a part of showmanship and in the healthy battle of competition, and others will say, hey, it's like nobody goes into a handshake line in the NFL or the NBA, so let's just mirror that. There's another point that, while I was getting my hair cut this week, that was a point that I'm struggling with this idea, because of course I don't want to ever see anybody get fired. And there were in the barbershop, there was the black and white discussion about this. But here's my real question, because you're a U of M guy. So you can be the president of the university, and you can have a consensual adult sexual whatever relationship with a subordinate, and you lose your job, but you can assault somebody on national TV at the end of the game and you get suspended. I'm trying to figure out, not that I want to see this guy get hung out to dry, but I'm a Spartan, and I'm like, anytime a woman can get hung out to dry, I'm all for that. But I think I get a sense of what that of the sense, because that's how I looked at it. I was like, immediately I was like, he's going to lose his job. I was like,
Only
because the president got fired.
Right.
Surely the basketball coach was going to get him out
but
there.
he did.
As
He
a-
did, David. He lost his job for 5 games.
as a fellow,
He won't be there long, though. I'm telling you, I don't think Juwan has got I don't think there's a future there. I think this is just TikTok to something else.
as a fellow U of M partisan, if I could just bring the discussion down with some trash talk, only a Spartan could see that little cuff upside the head as an assault. It's just like it wasn't even a didn't even qualify as a bitch slap.
It's apples and oranges comparing Schlissel to Juwan Howard. Number one, as we all know, all you have to do is read the newspaper. Schlissel was in deep shit there for quite some time. The Board of Regents was looking for a reason to get rid of him. They instituted a written policy that said you can't do what he did. He did it anyway, and it gave him an excuse to fire a guy they already wanted to fire for any number of reasons, and it's been going on almost since he took the job. Juwan Howard, despite what people want to say, and again, when you talk about black and white, I'm not going to get into all that, but those of us who know, who spent their life playing in the city, there's certain things you don't do, okay? Putting your hands on people is one thing you don't do. Saying what the guy said, which I'm not going to repeat, what that assistant coach said, I know what he said. You guys don't. And I know it because I was told, okay?
Please
and if he
share.
says like that in the streets, you're fighting for sure.
That's right. Fighting words.
It's not excusing the conduct, but you got to remember, David, you know this because you lived your entire life as a black person. The world is different for black folk than it is for all these white people shooting their mouth off. Okay, that's number one. Number two, unlike Schlissel, Juwan Howard is a highly respected, not just coach, but a person everywhere he's been. Those of us who are old enough, and most everybody sitting up here is, when the Fab Five came, it was Chris and Jalen and Jimmy every now and then, and everybody was going crazy. Look at them, they jump up and down, they're wearing high socks. Juwan Howard, they shave their heads. Juwan Howard was the rock of that group. He played 20 years in the NBA and never a peep, never anything about this. He was an assistant coach for 5 years with Spoelstra at the best franchise, with Pat Riley as the GM, and not a peep. What he did was screw up. And let me just throw one other thing out there for you guys' consumption. And this is something that civilians, and what I call civilians, are people who never played. Okay, this is what civilians don't think about. Tom Izzo said it the best, and he's the Michigan State coach, and he's a very respected guy who has had his temper tantrums, which none of them bother me ever, quite frankly. But what did Tom Izzo say when they asked him about this? What he said was, number one, it's uncalled for. We can't have it. We all agree with that. Juwan agrees with that. But he went on to say, and it's so true, he said people don't understand the amount of pressure that coaches at this level are under in this day and age. No matter how much money they're making, no matter how much people are kissing their behinds out in the press or whatever, they've got the pressure of NIL. They got the pressure of the transfer portal. They got the pressure of recruiting. And sometimes you can see the looks on the, look at Izzo during the season. I know him pretty well. I see him at golf outings. We laugh, we have a beer, we have a great time. Look at him in the games. And this is a man who's won national championships. He's in the Hall of Fame. Look at Turgeon last year, the guy who got canned from Maryland that Juwan had to think. The man looked like he was dead out there because the pressure was killing him. You look at most of these coaches, there's very few guys who are like Phil Martelli. And the reason Phil Martelli can do that is because he's an assistant. So I just tossed that all out there, too. There's not really any comparison between Schlissel, the way he was viewed.
Although I'll say the thing about Schlissel, I mean, I agree. Look, they were looking for a reason to fire him, and they found it. And the reason saying that it was unbecoming of the university image or whatever, and that's what I thought would be sort of the category for which Juwan Howard. I get it. It could. I thought this guy's not. Right when it happened, I said this guy can't survive this. He's going to get fired. I said, what university is going to allow that type of behavior to represent the university? But
right.
Maybe athletics. Look, athletics is such a big part of that school. I mean, for financial, for image, for donations and stuff like that. It's and people didn't like Schlissel.
I think, Alan, what you got to keep in mind too, they're talking about firing. I'm on Facebook with a lot of the ex-players, okay, football and basketball, and a lot of the ex-players are black. And if you read their comments afterward, nobody liked what happened. There wasn't a soul who was talking about firing. And had he been fired, there'd have been a loud scream, I'm telling you, from the players themselves, particularly the black players. And you got to recognize that, even though white people don't like to recognize that because it's a white society. It's the same reason that whether you're Arabic or you're Jewish or something, they want it to be the way they want it to be because they've been running the world for time immemorial. Unfortunately for them, it ain't that way. And the University of Michigan Award Manual had to think about that.
Although we ran a column. A friend of mine, Michael James, who used to work at the Detroit News, and then he worked for the New York Daily News covering the New Jersey Nets. And he has a website called the Tribe Sports. He's black. He basically made that comparison with Schlissel, and he said he thought he got a slap on the wrist, and it was an insult to fairness. And him being black, So I don't think it's totally a black and white thing.
Clarence Thomas is black too, so I mean, okay.
Well, this guy is no Clarence. This guy is no Clarence Thomas. I assure you.
Black person. I'm telling you, I didn't just listen to this guy. I'm seeing 100 guys, right?
Sure.
I'm talking to or communicating with, and I know what people's attitudes were. Nobody liked what happened. Everybody thinks he should be punished. But almost all of us believe the Ward Manual did the exact right thing.
I'm still focused on the idea that maybe Juwan should have taken some lessons from Naomi Osaka and said, yeah, maybe the press conference isn't necessarily the best place for me to be right after the match. But what do I know?
That was a catch-22 for him, because if he didn't, we might be sitting here saying, he should have taken the moment to, make that apology, that sort of stuff. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, we all have to deal with the whole cancel culture idea now. And sometimes, even as a PR pro, I'm hamstringed trying to understand, sometimes you take a step and you think it's the right thing. And then you're like, wow, we missed that one. Didn't expect that to happen. So whether he had done the press conference immediately after, people would have said, we want to hear from Juwan. And then he would have had to eventually go in front of the media, and that could have gone any kind of way. So maybe he didn't help it, but maybe he in fact did help himself, because he only got a suspension. Again, it's just one of the weirdest things that I've ever seen. I'm like, if you can, I was really anticipating to see something that was like the reminiscence of the Pistons back in, when Meta.
The Malice at the Palace. I think those comparisons have been made. But I mean, so the rumor that he saved his job because he'd forgotten to sign the honor code, and so they couldn't get him. That's not true then. Okay, just checking. All right, that was what was instilled in our heads when we were taking Blue Book exams at Michigan. Sign the damn honor code. Well, there's been some other blame going around in this town, and that is former Chief of Police James Craig. With an alleged letter going out in which he throws the Michigan State Police under the bus for supposedly being weak-kneed when he was having an event at Belle Isle, and there were demonstrators there who were saying things that he didn't like. There's now some controversy about whether his campaign, in fact, sent the letter. It seems like there's some denials going around. Notwithstanding the letter and whether he sent it, how does this look for James Craig in now what is becoming a bit more crowded of a gubernatorial primary season? I think there was some guy who looks like a very much older version of Clay Aiken who's running on the Republican. Did you catch that too, David?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, this guy. I almost thought it was him.
There you go. There you go. All right.
I think it's so petty. Quite frankly, I think of Craig. I mean, that happened a year ago?
Yep.
A little over a year ago.
What?
Out there. At this point, he needs to move.
Last summer. That's
you're
talking about when he was. Yeah. Okay. Right.
But he had his press conference. He had his press conference, and people were crowding him, and the state police did nothing. And he did it at Belle Isle, which is a state police property there. Or jurisdiction, and he's I mean, it's interesting. The field is filling up there. Craig has not gotten. I think the litmus test for Trump to get Trump's endorsement, which I think he wanted. He went down there. The litmus test was whether you believe that the 2020 election was a fraud, and if you say yes, then Trump will give you his stamp of approval. If not, so. I don't know that nobody has gotten in the gubernatorial race yet has gotten it. it's getting more crowded. I mean, you have some goofballs in there. I mean, you have, you just have some people. You have Kevin Rinke, who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. You got this,
Tudor Dixon.
Yeah, you've got all
Daddy's
these people,
girl.
and so I don't know that the competition is very, very tough. And for Whitmer, it's good for her because they're all kind of, I don't know.
It's like the C team.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Who was his campaign manager or consultant or coordinator? Was it John Yob at that time, the guy who quit? I can't remember. Lingle. Charlie wrote a column about it. I think it was John Yob because I think he moved on to Perry Johnson, aka Clay Aiken's granddad. But I can't believe anybody would have set up a press conference for James Craig at Belle Isle. That was insane. And because it's a public park. And if you don't have some sort of roped off area with security that's keeping, the Detroit Will Breathe people out, that was a preordained event, which is that he would be shouted down. And in fact, there was a lot of speculation at the time it happened that this was done on purpose so that he could get, the video of him being canceled, so that he'd have something to fall back on. But the fact that the same guy eventually quit and now is working for Perry Johnson with the flying math equations by his head suggests that it's just apparently that is a job that you cannot fail out of in Michigan as a Republican campaign consultant, because that was really, I don't think he's distinguishing himself. Of course,
so the news is
these guys all have bad campaign managers. I mean, what I've seen so far, I mean.
I just wanted to ask David a question because this is his business. A lot of people said when Craig announced his candidacy that cops, particularly police chiefs, people who are used to being in authority, really don't know what they're getting into when they start getting into the mix of politics. Do you feel that that's an element of the problems that he's had? He's used to being a chief and tell people what to do, and all of a sudden there's all kind of chaos around him.
Absolutely. There's a reason why they call him Hollywood, and that's just because, he has that sensibility, and he's used to just throwing around the 5 stars that's on the collar. And, politics is rough and tumble. And why, being a chief of police, there's also political stuff that you have to deal with. But the reality is, it's one thing, when you're at the top of an organization like a police force, but you still have to deal with your boss, which, at that time was Mayor Duggan. I mean, so he should have understand the situation that he was in before he got to this point. I think it was a bad move on his part, even to go down this route. I think he tarnished greatly his name and the work that, if there's something he wants to hang his hat on. And I just think it's a failed attempt anyway. It just does not make sense to me. Everything about his campaign didn't make sense to me. Him coming out and on the Republican side, him doing this coming out on Belle Isle. I mean, he could have easily gone to Lansing, or he could have gone, set up a campaign office a little bit more, definitely more controlled. So again, I don't even see him as a viable anything in this because he just doesn't have any weight at all.
I think he's a viable. I still think he's a viable candidate, only because the other candidates are not that strong. But I think he's missed opportunities to show some independence. I mean, he should have never even gone down to visit Trump. He should have said, "Yeah, I'm a Republican because I believe in this, and that, but I don't believe in all the bullshit that Trump is feeding." And then he came out the other day, like a week ago or so, about the truckers and said, "I support the truckers blocking the bridge." And that was a whole, Rand Paul later came out and said, "We hope the truckers block the Super Bowl," and stuff like that. There was an opportunity to sort of distance himself from the stupidity that comes out sometimes. And he doesn't know what he's doing. So he's taking cues from the party, and he's going to screw himself over by listening to them too much.
What's interesting about this is that when I listen to him, I'm thinking, this was our chief of police. Like, does he really believe this stuff? And at the time that he's supposed to be helping, clean up our streets and all this, I'm like, he sounds like the kind of person who I would not want, running a police force in, a black city that is Detroit. I'm looking at the guy, but I'm like, what am I looking at? Like, I don't get this, and it is totally off balancing, as to hear him and to think like, do you really believe this? I mean, I want to say no, and that you're just pandering, to the party that you selected to run in, but maybe he does, and maybe we had it all wrong.
Well, there's only one chief of police from Detroit who has the moniker right for Hollywood, and that's Gil Hill. We all remember Beverly Hills Cop.
That's a whole other story, Gil Hill.
But what about the idea that, according to the reports, Michigan has had the strongest post-COVID recovery, has the strongest economy, and Whitmer is being credited for that. Will that be enough for her to create some more distance between herself and a Republican candidate?
Okay, this is going to be simple answers to needlessly complicated questions, and I'm going to say no. There was a Crane's writer who took that was a Bloomberg op-ed, which it was like one of those world's fat, Detroit is the nation's fattest city, according to some magazine that nobody reads. And the whole idea is like, we take like the number, population and the number of health clubs and fried chicken restaurants, and we mush it all up. And the whole point of those things is to get the name of the magazine into the stories.
Divided by order of fries.
Yeah, exactly. So, this was when I was traveling, so I didn't have a chance to get really deep into it, but I think it was Dustin Walsh who said the reason that data looks so good for Michigan is because we had fallen so far. Then we made a little bit of a bounce back, but everybody made a bounce back. I really don't think that's something that Gretchen Whitmer can take credit for. In fact, in general, I don't think economic activity is. Go ahead.
I was going to say that. Look, we had, the train station is great. It's great. It's great for Detroit and stuff like that. But overall for Michigan, I mean, we're losing out. Ford is going with their battery, their EV thing. They're going down south. We're losing. Ohio is getting these huge manufacturing companies. We're not getting those. So I think, as Nancy said, I mean, that story is very not quite right. An accurate picture. But that being said, right now the Republican challengers are not very good, and
they're terrible.
They're terrible. That's a nice way of putting it.
They're really bad.
So as of now, Whitmer, and look, the election's not that far off. We're talking about November.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Just a few months. So, James, you mentioned James Craig supporting the truckers at the bridge and at the border. There's talk about a convoy going to clog up the beltway of D.C. I'm not sure if that's going to happen anytime now because of the Ukraine situation clogging up the news cycle. But what about the idea of, as Rand Paul was saying, we're going to go Churchill. We're going to fight them in the beltway. We're going to fight them on the bridge.
Having just driven the Beltway of Washington last week around this time, I think they will have met their match if they try to clog the Beltway, because the Beltway is
already clogged.
It operates in kind of a perma-clogged manner, but I don't know. I mean,
five Priuses can take out any semi any day. Yeah.
One of the things, apparently, the truckers did kind of a side trip to Toronto, I believe, and that didn't get nearly any coverage here. I only really knew about it because I follow a few Canadians on Twitter, and they were tweeting about it. And I guess the Toronto reception for those guys was hostile. And I think if these dudes try to bring their roadshow, so to speak, to DC, it's going to be the same thing. Not from the government, but from the people who actually live there and have to deal with DC traffic. I mean, Langley used to live there, so he knows what it's like. But the only thing I want to say about this is, remember after the 2020 police violence protests that we had all over the country, a number of states with Republican legislatures rushed through these laws that said you could run people over if they blocked your car, because some places tried to actually block your they blocked freeways. So I'm looking forward to a few of these people getting run over. So we'll see.
I just don't get it, to be honest with you. I fail to get it. I mean, long haulers are in high demand right now. You have these logistics companies paying top dollar to get drivers in, and I just want to say, they should just shut up and drive.
They don't even have any restrictions. There are no meaningful COVID restrictions.
Isn't that what Laura Ingraham said to LeBron?
Right.
Shut up and dribble. Yeah,
that's exactly what he said.
Like, stop worrying about going to DC, and can you please get these packages to Amazon? Because it's like, I'm tired of, like, no longer I can't get my 2 days, and I'm a Prime member and I'm not even guaranteed 2 days anymore. So, like, get my stuff here.
The new Amazon distribution centers were in the former Silverdome parking lot. I get my replacement USB cable in 3 hours.
Wow. If they hadn't closed Radio Shack, we could go out and get those things ourselves.
Right now you go online, and if it says it's going to take a week, you're like, "Are you kidding me?"
I still would wait patiently 6 to 8 weeks after eating 4 boxes of cereal to collect the box tops to get a decoder ring. So my sense of time is quite different.
If you're old enough to remember the advent of the microwave oven, a Joan Rivers joke back then was Liz Taylor is so fat she stands in front of her microwave and yells "hurry." That was a joke because microwaves were so fast. And now, who among us has not sat in front of a microwave at some point in our lives and said, "Jesus Christ, why is this taking so long?" So there you go.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, in all of human history, they haven't found a way to make popcorn pop any faster than the 2 minutes in the microwave. So exactly. Approaching the speed of light. So now comes another sporting controversy. Because we don't have enough leagues in the world, now comes the idea that a country that doesn't really have that much grass is kicking in for a new super league for golf. The Saudi Super League is meant to rival the PGA. And in order to do that, and you cue the Rodney Dangerfield Caddyshack moment here, I'll take 6 of those, 12 of those, give me a half a dozen naked lady tees. They're trying to peel off PGA players to join the league, which of course would probably mean they'd get excommunicated from the PGA, but that's okay. And the point person for this was none other than lefty, 51-year-old Phil Mickelson, he who has won 6 major titles, coming over to the Saudi side in the big golf Red Rover game. That got a little bit of backlash, particularly because his biography even has, he claims, off-the-record statements, out-of-context statements, but the author said, nah, it was all on the record, that the Saudis are scary MFs, that they are scary in doing business. After all, they killed Khashoggi, they killed gay people, and if you want to know why I'm still doing this, is because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reform the PGA. Some other PGA players say, no, don't bring us in on this. And Rory McIlroy said in a press conference in response that Mickelson's conduct was egotistical, ignorant, and I'd even say it was fairly naive. That's my best Northern Irish accent.
That couldn't even make it in community theater, buddy. But go ahead.
I know a guy in Dublin. But anyway, this is the dilemma which has now caused Mickelson not quite to reverse the golf cart. He's apologized and said he's trying to disavow himself now of the Super League, which of course was going to give him untold millions. But he's still doubling down and saying that the PGA needs reform. What's going on, David? Oh, I'm sorry. We got a finger from Steve first.
So this is another question for David again. It makes me wonder, where was Mr. Mickelson's PR guy before he was allowed to go out and make statements like that? That's my first question. And David can answer that one. I'll just give you a couple of comments on it. It's a lot more than just a few pushbacks from the PGA. I mean, if you read I only read it all in the newspaper, but almost every great player, not just said, I ain't doing it, but they really talked about him badly. And of course, the one who's still the king of golf is Tiger Woods, who of course said, I have no interest whatsoever, blah, 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 blah. The only thing that I don't know, none of us know for sure, there's been an awful lot of commentary over the years with Mickelson. There's not any doubt what a great player the guy is and how much money he's made. But if he's the type of gambler that people say he is, it is at least possible, it seems to me, and I don't know, this is just my speculation, that maybe he needs a big pile of dough that maybe the Saudis are offering, because there's no other reasonable explanation for this. The PGA Tour, people make a ton of dough. And the guys who are high up in the tour make the most dough. And it's a very competitive environment. There aren't very many in the individual sports, tennis and golf. You don't have the same kind of camaraderie that you might have in baseball or football or basketball or hockey. And I doubt very much that the guys at the top of the earnings pyramid sit around worrying too much about the guys who are struggling along at only a couple $100,000 a year, unless it happens to be their younger brother or a guy they grew up with or something like that. So to me, the only possible explanation for it is that he is that big of a gambler, that he's a Jordan level gambler, but he's not a billionaire like Jordan, and that he needs the dough. But I would love to hear what David has to say about both of those issues, particularly why he would make statements like he made to make such an asshole out of himself.
Well, Steve, you're right. The first thing when I heard of that, I was like, this has to be some sort of money grab or something. It makes no sense. And he's in the rare air area of winnings anyway. So I'm like, so either if you're number one, if you're pushing this, you're right. It's a gamble. It doesn't exactly seem to make any particular sense on that side of it. And then to say the things that he said, just to me is like, really, like like where are you coming from with this? And on top of that, these guys don't seem to have any love lost for the bottom anyway. And like you say, he's right up there. I'm like, so what do you? I mean, unless you need some bread money, then I guess maybe you are trying to push this in some weird fashion. But again, to me, it's one of those things where when I heard that, I'm like, another league? Are you serious? We have enough problems with the first league, in so many different areas, from diversity and all this kind of stuff. And now you want to create something else that's already a highly exclusionary sport in the first place.
You don't want a USFL of golf, David?
You're the Middle East expert. Is golf a thing in the? I mean, I'd be less surprised by the news that there's a new falconry league in this, that the Saudis are backing. But golf, I've never even seen. I've never seen a golf. I'm sure there's a golf course somewhere in Saudi Arabia, but I just can't imagine Saudis playing golf.
So Saudi Aramco used to have what were called browns, which were oil manicured sanded fields. Okay. And they used to then have to go back and almost like Zamboni them because it was densely packed sand, but they would play on that. Saudi Arabia is trying to severely uptick its tourism. And I think that as they're putting together resorts, they were hoping to have the cachet of saying a Phil Mickelson design course, which they could have even without this league. Well, but it is more of a matter of, let's face it, you go around the world and half the sports around the world have something sponsored by Emirates or sponsored by Etihad or Qatar Airways. Right. I think that this was their way to kind of cash in and buy in. That's the only thing that makes sense on this.
What would be the golf season for them? I'm just curious.
It would be let's see, New Year's Day to MLK Day.
I want to go there to be like, exactly when am I supposed to be in the desert playing golf? Like, how does this work?
Somebody told me there is no tourism in Saudi Arabia. Has that changed? There's basically two visas to get into the Soviet Union. There's work and prayer. So if you're there for the Hajj, or if you're an observant Muslim there for the Hajj, you can get in. And if you work for Canada Bell and you've been hired to install a telephone system, you can go there.
Wow, it's changing. That is an obscure corporate reference, but thank you.
Well, that's because the person that told me that worked for Canada Bell.
Okay, I'm looking for the chain of transmission there. Actually, Saudi Arabia has in the last few years really ramped it up. They are developing tourism areas, especially archaeological excavations in the northwest. There's a lot of Nabatean ruins in the same way as Petra of Jordan. They're also trying to develop a bunch of islands off the Red Sea, which are nature preserves, but also places for people to hang out. A lot more resorts. Concert, I think Justin Bieber played there. Lionel Richie played there. Not at the same time, because that would be too overwhelming. So they are making this push to be a little bit more sober version of Dubai, under the conceit that why should those Gulf states have all the fun? So that might be part of the reason why this is going on.
Are they going to change it to the Gulf states?
Ooh.
The people I've known who traveled there tell horrible stories about it. I mean, it's particularly for women. It's just, I mean, some of the stories I've heard about women who were over there working are just.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think women have just gotten the right to drive. Is that?
They did.
That was about 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the liberalization policies are happening. It is not quite a Jeffersonian democracy yet.
Okay.
Not sure if it will be. But it's interesting to see their moxie of where they're trying to do this and what's motivating them. But I mean, Mickelson has already paid the price. KPMG dropped him like a bad habit, his main sponsor, and it'll be interesting to see if Callaway drops him. I mean, having to choose between a 9 and a 7 iron bone saw may not happen now.
Maybe he can get a falconry concern to pick up that slack. So
hey, Nancy, you got to go to Qatar. You got to go to Doha. They have a falconry hospital there.
Really, I would love to see falconry in action.
And people, I mean, bring their falcons from all around the Gulf. I mean, some of them are for like 100,000, 250,000.
Yeah,
they're magnificent birds. But seeing one get triaged as it's coming in on an ambulance. It's a little bit gut-wrenching, I gotta say.
Oh, God. Okay.
Anyways, on that note, we are now going to...
And now, it's time for Deadline Detroit's nominees for Schmuck of the Week.
Yeah, and by the way, that was not motivated by me feeling as though the wheels were falling off the wagon on the show right now. Of course not that.
They're not.
They're not. We're just getting loopy. David, who is your Schmuck of the Week?
Okay. I believe I got a good one here. So my Schmuck of the Week.
There's no prizes, mate, so don't worry.
Okay. So it is Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman. He is a professor, chair of the School of Psychiatric whatever at Columbia University. So not too long ago, he was fired for a comment that he made on Twitter. He was responding to something that has been out there erroneously. An African model by the name of Nakim Gatwich, and she there's been this post out there that says that the Guinness Book of World Records, she holds the record for, and I'm quoting, the darkest skin ever seen on Earth. So Professor Lieberman decided to retweet that with his own commentary that read, "Whatever a work of art or freak of nature, she's beautiful, signed, a beautiful sight to behold." Well, he lost his job for that, and I think rightfully so. And that was just one of those, insert, open mouth, and he put his foot right into the proverbial, social media,
meat grinder.
And so there it is. Look.
Was it the phrase "freak of nature"?
The university didn't really say. It was the fact that he even, sort of co-signed the tweet about her skin color and the Guinness Book of World Records. So there's no truth to that, because the Guinness Book of World Records did indicate that they do not keep any particular.
The Guinness Book of World Records
on who has darkest skin or not.
Yeah. They exist to kind of get their name in the paper. They're like the people that say Detroit is the world's fattest city. But anyway, go ahead.
I used to read the Guinness Book of World Records as a kid every year.
Really?
Cover to cover. Yes.
Wow.
I no longer know who's got the world's longest fingernails, and it crushes me.
I am proudly so. I have a plaque from the Guinness Book of World Records because I participated with our client Detroit Dog Rescue. It was maybe about 6 years ago where we looked at the number of doggy Kongs that could be stuffed with peanut butter, and we own the record for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's going on your headstone, buddy.
Wow.
That's enough to make my fingernails grow.
I don't think anybody, and actually someone held the record of that, believe it or not.
Wow.
So at first I was.
Oh, that's a different book altogether.
Yeah, there you go. So.
All right. Steve.
I have to put my glasses on because I like to read the actual quotes from my schmuck. My schmuck was pretty simple. Senator Tommy, football coach Tommy Tuberville, who became senator because the people in Alabama obviously are deaf, dumb, and blind. Okay, he gave the following quote. He was asked about Putin and all the things going on in the Ukraine, and his answer was to why Putin is doing what he's doing. He can't feed his people. It's a communist country, so he can't feed his people, so they need more farmland. That was his first quote. And that was enough, I think, to qualify him. But then he had another quote because they stupidly asked him another question about the Defense Department and the United States military. And he claimed that the United States military is an example of woke culture. And he quotes, "We need a killing machine." Not that we would want to kill anybody, but people know we will kill them if they come here and mess with us. That was his quote when asked to analyze the Department of Defense and Vladimir Putin. And to me, he wins the Schmuck of the Week, but he gets to partner with anybody in the state of Alabama that voted for his ass.
Well, you know now the military under Biden only uses rubber bullets and rubber bombs.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, that's my guy.
That's good.
And rubber tanks, apparently.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay. Nancy.
I am going with. I feel a little bad about this one because I think his entertainment value outweighs his schmuckitude. But because he's in the news this week, I'm going with Perry Johnson, aka Clay Aiken's grandfather, who gave his first "Get to Know Me" speech as part of his campaign for governor, and he took pre-recorded questions that were displayed on video by supporters of his. And that is part of a general trend among, Whitmer is the same way. I mean, ever since social media, candidates are simply not engaging with the legit media anymore. I mean, John James managed to get through 2 Senate campaigns answering about 5 questions, and I have no doubt that he's not going to answer any more in his congressional campaign. So I'm just going to, even though I really am looking forward to watching Perry Johnson, until he flames out, because he has this gesture he likes to do, and then he smiles and he goes like this, and because of all the plastic surgery and his golden hair, he's just a really weird looking guy. But I'm looking forward to the rest of his campaign, but he needs to stop being part of the tradition of not talking to the media.
Nancy, that is part of his ISO 2000, one of his books. That's one of those chapters.
That gesture? Okay.
His was seriously even dumber of an ad in the Super Bowl than the bouncing icon of that crypto company.
Perfection.
Alan.
All right. I have 2. One is Kevin Rinke, a Republican gubernatorial candidate who recently put out a newsletter telling people to sign a petition telling Gretchen Whitmer to open up our businesses again and free up things when we haven't had restrictions for almost a year now. So the guy is totally clueless. And the other one is the Crumblies, the parents yesterday. I mean, just watching, I spent the day watching the hearing, and the judge made the right decision, binding it over. And here, just this quote was read from Ethan Crumbley's journal, and it says, "I have fully mentally lost it after years of fighting my dark side. My parents won't listen to me about help or a therapist." I mean, that quote in itself is enough to bind them over. So,
Talk
Okay,
about throwing the under the bus.
So there's plenty of choices this week for schmucks. There's no paucity of schmucks. But this one I thought really takes the cake. An Indian medical student at the Medical College of Indore was busted for cheating on his exams. Again, not something that's really uncommon or unheard of, except this guy's been at this medical school for 11 years. He's quite literally the Van Wilder of med school in India. And he got busted this time by, instead of studying and putting his diligence there, he was surgically implanted with a Bluetooth device subcutaneously by an ENT surgeon. On a spot check, the invigilators, as the article calls them, found a phone with a Bluetooth signal. And they're looking for the signal, and then he finally cops to it that it was subcutaneous. And there was some guy who was feeding him the answers from a different room. If he would have either spent a little bit more time studying anatomy and physiology instead of changing his own anatomy and physiology, perhaps he could then go ahead and call himself among the ranks of doctor. But he's my schmuck of the week.
This is like Mission Impossible, man. That's
yeah,
wow.
I guess you could say he didn't hear it coming a mile away. But
yeah.
Okay, David Rudolph, Steve Fishman, Nancy Derringer, thanks so much for being on, and Alan,
drive home safely.